Hey guys, welcome back to another whiteboard chat. Today we're going to talk about refeeds, diet breaks, free meals, or if we want to generalize all this into overfeeding. This was a topic request from my Instagram story. I put up a poll, or I guess a question box, if you will. I had a lot of requests on there. I always appreciate the requests. Keep in mind when we're picking topics, we want we want them to be somewhat specific, so I have something to cover, but also not so specific that I need necessarily like a case study to cover it. Like someone had asked about healing something or correcting something, which was a very specific issue. Little difficult to cover on here when I don't know much about the client. So I do like to do case studies occasionally. I actually have a couple lab work results for myself. I did that one recently. I have another one coming up. I'll probably do like a Dutch test breakdown on here of some sort as well. What are we looking at specifically here first? And there's going to be different definitions for these things based on who you ask, and that's fine. All that we're really seeing is, what are the differences between the three, and they're all kind of overfeeding, if you will. So I'm classifying yours as a refeed as 24 to 72 hours, normally more like middle ground somewhere in there. Diet break being, 5 days or more, a week, 2 weeks even, some cases. Free meals, obviously one hypercaloric meal. One meal that is over your normal caloric intake. Diet breaks, normally I like to do a diet break in a very slight surplus, closer to maintenance, very slight surplus. Refeeds, a little more than that. Free meals, obviously, a lot of the time, unless you're controlling them, are going to be even more than that, right? And then obviously duration, shortest to longest duration. We have a lot of literature on overfeeding at this point. What are the things that it tells us? It tells us a few things. One, free meals or one hypercaloric meal probably doesn't have much, if any, impact on markers of metabolic adaptation, so the things that we're typically concerned about, thyroid, leptin, etc. Refeeds, when we start getting closer to the 48-hour range, start to have a more profound benefit. This is where a lot of all of the benefits are starting to be seen. Diet breaks, probably the same thing, just a little bit better. Time out of that deficit is always going to elicit an even greater response, because we know in 48 hours we're not going to fully reverse weeks and weeks or months of a calorie deficit and fat loss. And we also know that leptin, for example, being a primary fat burning hormone, is very body fat dependent too. So we can't just overfeed with calories but not regain body fat. We will not fully restore leptin. We'll start back at the bottom. So the free meals, and bear with me on my voice, I have some kind of congestion going on, so it's kind of scratchy. But free meals, like I said, little to no, probably no effect on the body in terms of metabolic adaptation and in regards to overfeeding benefits. Or is there any benefit? Yeah, I mean, psychologically, we see people sometimes lose weight from free meals, and a lot of that's probably because of a large dump in cortisol and fluid. We see people gain weight from free meals, which again, probably glycogen and water a lot of the time. Of course, you could overfeed enough in one meal to store fat for sure. Does this really have any place in fat loss? Yeah, potentially in the right context as a psychological relief. And again, everything's still boiling down to energy balance at the end of the day. I mean, you could still implement a free meal in at one point and still be in an energy deficit the rest of the time and lose fat. Definitely something you could implement in the plan if you wanted to. Does it have a physiological benefit? Not really. Psychological, perhaps. But also beyond that, it might actually be a detriment to some people, because it might kind of trigger some overeating if they're eating some of these hyperpalatable foods, especially as they get further into the deficit and their hunger signaling becomes more and more off. As you know, your palate starts to kind of change. Everything tastes good at that point. So can be kind of a dangerous tactic at a point. Refeeds. Let's talk about 48 hours. We'll say that because that seems to be a standard practice for a lot of people. And we know that a lot of the benefit is in that range. Refeeding will, especially on carbohydrate, will help raise leptin levels some. Maybe not significantly. It probably depends on how suppressed the person is and how much you're refeeding, and again, what the time period is. Diet breaks, same thing, just more. So what are the benefits of overfeeding? And why would we do it? Well, I talked about the leptin some. Leptin is basically a hormone that controls the size of the fat cell. That's a big part of what it does. So it is a fat loss hormone. It also helps control hunger signaling, works side by side with ghrelin. Leptin is controlled primarily by body fat. The fat cells are going to be the biggest kind of regulator of this hormone, but calories do make some difference. We know in the data that you will not probably restore full leptin levels until you regain body fat after a competition or after a diet. So if you are far away from your natural set point, your leptin levels are probably going to be lower. You're probably not going to fully regain those unless you gain enough body fat back. However, we can offset that some with overfeeding. Decrease cortisol, decrease in reverse T3 or RT3. Coming up, we get the cortisol going down. We know that T4 to T3 conversion generally is enhanced with overfeeding. And a lot of that, again, is because of that cortisol coming down. So we're getting less of our T4 pushed over into reverse T3. We're getting more of it converting into free T3 or into T3, which we hope is free T3 unbound, right? Performance benefits. Sure. I mean, caloric influx, we could expect maybe some performance benefit. Make you happier. Neurochemicals, as I said. So neurochemicals, you do get a rise in neurotransmitters and you do get a rise in how you feel with overfeeding. Of course, could be good. There could be some downside. There could be a point where doing something like a free meal might have some negative outcome. Again, if it sets off maybe a cascade of events that you don't want, but it should generally cause a positive return in terms of neurochemicals and mood. Hey, maybe that carries you for a few days into the deficit again and kind of keeps you going. Adiponectin, the research shows some benefit here and in some cases, no real rise. This is a protein that is involved in fat loss as well. Again, I believe the research that I saw specifically was talking about women. So some women had a rise, some didn't. Take that for what you will. But again, overfeeding in general is probably going to elicit most of these responses. We know carbohydrate has the most effect on leptin, fat has little to no effect, and fat even showed in some cases to reduce leptin levels. Though if you overfed on both fat and carbohydrates and you're in a caloric surplus, you're still going to have some benefit there, right? So coming out of the deficit is really what's giving you a lot of that benefit. Time is a big portion of this, making sure you're doing it for adequate time. One meal is not adequate time. One day might have a little bit of effect, but getting into that 2+ day range, we're starting to get more of an effect. Also consider that this becomes more important the further away from homeostasis that we get, the further into a deficit that you get, the leaner that you get, the more compromised that you get, the more metabolically adapted that you get, the more this becomes important. If you're a new fat loss client, you maybe started overweight. Is it really that important? Probably not, and probably not forming a lot of metabolic adaptation for quite a while until you get leaner. Keep that in mind. If you are deep into a fat loss phase or a contest prep, probably need it, right? You probably need them maybe even more often, or they need to be larger. And also keep in mind, size of refeeding does matter. It's not a free ticket to just eat whatever you want and eat however much you want, because of course energy balance is still the #1 factor in fat loss here. So yes, you could overeat a refeed and stall your fat loss and not get any benefit, perhaps have a negative. So that is definitely possible. That's kind of a breakdown on the main benefits, some of the hormones involved, how thyroid hormone conversion is affected, how leptin is affected, neurochemicals, performance, differences between free meals, refeeds, diet breaks, talking about duration as a really important factor, and then also kind of considerations in how much you might refeed. Keep in mind, as a side note, maintenance, that word is going to have a range to it, okay? A lot of people have a maintenance range, right? Keep that in mind when you're looking at increases in calories in terms of setting up an overfeeding period. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed this short little insight into refeeding and diet breaks. As always, if you have questions, feel free to add them. If you have specifics, I can do my best to answer them. Of course, if you're not my client, I'm not working with you, might be difficult, but I would be more than happy to give my insights. Hopefully this is helpful. Talk to you all next time.